James Reynolds stood on his porch, the chill of the early autumn breeze brushing against his weathered face. The sun was setting behind the row of maple trees lining his quiet suburban street, their leaves a vibrant palette of red and gold. The evening light cast a golden hue on his modest two-story house, once a bustling home filled with laughter and chaos, now a place of aching silence. He took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill his lungs before he walked toward the mailbox at the end of the driveway. The metal creaked as he opened it, the familiar sound echoing into the stillness. He reached in and felt the rough texture of envelopes against his fingertips. Bills, advertisements, and his hand paused a plain white envelope, its edges slightly worn, no return address. He turned it over, his eyes narrowing as he noticed the unfamiliar, almost childlike handwriting spelling out his name, James Reynolds. Curiosity battled with caution as he carried the mail back into the house, the wooden floorboards creaking under his heavy steps. He dropped the other letters on the kitchen counter, keeping the unmarked envelope in his hand. He hesitated, his thumb running along its edge, before tearing it open. A single sheet of paper fell out, folded neatly. His heart skipped a beat as he unfolded it, his eyes tracing the handwritten words. "Hi, Dad, it's me, Lily." James' knees buckled, and he gripped the edge of the counter to steady himself. No, it couldn't be. His mind raced, memories flooding back with cruel clarity. His daughter, Lily, who had vanished without a trace 13 years ago. She was just 14 then, full of life and laughter. He had come home from work to find her room empty, the window slightly ajar, and her favorite backpack missing. For years he had plastered missing posters on every street corner, his face numb from answering detectives' questions, his hope dwindling with every passing day. His wife, Carol, had left 2 years after Lily disappeared, their marriage crumbling under the weight of shared grief and blame. He forced himself to keep reading, his hands trembling. "I know you must be angry. I'm sorry for leaving. I didn't know how to stay. I miss you every day. I hope you're okay. Love, Lily." The words were like a punch to his gut, raw and jagged. He sank to the floor, his back against the kitchen cabinet, the letter crumpling in his fist as sobs racked his body. 13 years of pain, fear, and guilt surged through him, threatening to tear him apart. She's alive. As his breathing slowed, questions crowded his mind. Where was she? Why now? Why hadn't she come home? He wiped his tears and unfolded the letter again, searching for more. There was nothing. No date, no address, no clue as to where she could be. Just his daughter's handwriting, a ghost from his past. His phone buzzed on the countertop, startling him. He glanced at the screen. Carol. It was late for her to be calling. He hesitated before answering, his voice cracking as he spoke. "Carol? James?" Her voice was tight, almost breathless. Did you get a letter too?" His heart raced. "You got one?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking, "from Lily." His world spun. Lily had written to both of them. He gripped the phone tighter. "What did she say?" "The same as yours, probably. That she missed us. That she's sorry. Oh God, James. She's out there somewhere." He closed his eyes, the image of his little girl flashing before him, her curly hair bouncing as she ran to him after school, her bright eyes sparkling with mischief. "We need to find her, Carol. We need to bring her home." A heavy silence hung between them, filled with the pain of years lost. Finally, Carol spoke, her voice steely with determination. "I've already called Detective Harris. He said he'd come by tomorrow morning. We'll get to the bottom of this. We owe it to her." James nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Yes, we owe it to her." They hung up, and James sank back against the cabinet, the letter still clutched in his hand. He looked around the empty kitchen, shadows stretching across the floor as the last light of day faded. He remembered Lily sitting at the very table where the envelope now lay, her laughter echoing in his mind. He stood up, his joints stiff, and walked over to the table. He picked up the envelope, turning it over again and again, searching for any sign of where it came from. There was nothing, just his name in that unmistakable handwriting. His gaze fell on the postmark, barely legible but unmistakably stamped with the name of a town, Silver Pines. His breath hitched. Silver Pines was almost 200 miles away. Why would Lily be there? Was she hiding? Or worse, was someone keeping her there? His mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. He had to find her. But as he reached for his phone to call Detective Harris, a sharp knock echoed through the house. He froze, his heart pounding. The knock came again, louder this time. Urgent. He moved cautiously toward the door, his pulse racing. Through the frosted glass, he could see the silhouette of a figure standing on the porch. He opened the door, and his breath caught in his throat. A woman stood there, drenched from the rain that had begun to fall, her hair plastered to her face. Her eyes were wide, her face pale. James' heart sank as he recognized her. It was Marie Thompson, Lily's best friend from childhood, the last person to see Lily before she disappeared. And she looked terrified. "James," she gasped, her voice trembling. "I got a letter too, but mine came with a warning. They told me to keep quiet, or they'd kill her." The world spun around him, his vision narrowing. Someone knew where Lily was, and they were willing to kill to keep her hidden. James stared at Marie, his mind struggling to process her words. Rain dripped from her soaked hair onto the porch, her shoulders trembling beneath her thin jacket. Her eyes darted nervously over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to emerge from the darkness. They threatened to kill her? James' voice wavered, his body rigid with shock. Marie nodded, hugging herself tightly. "The letter was slipped under my door last night. It was from Lily, but there was another note too. Someone else wrote it. It said to keep my mouth shut, or they'd make sure she was never found." James's heart raced. "Let me see it." Marie hesitated, her face tightening. I burned it." She flinched at his look of disbelief. "I was scared, James. Whoever sent that letter knows where I live. They know I knew Lily. I didn't want to take any chances." James took a shaky breath, the weight of her fear settling heavily on his chest. "Come inside. We need to figure out what's going on." He stepped aside, and Marie hesitated before crossing the threshold, her eyes lingering on the shadows beyond the street. James closed the door behind her, locking it and double-checking the bolt before leading her into the living room. The air was heavy with the scent of old leather and wood polish, the room dimly lit by the flickering glow of the fireplace. It was a room full of memories, a room where Lily had once curled up on the couch to watch cartoons on Saturday mornings. Marie stood awkwardly by the mantel, her gaze settling on a framed photograph of Lily. The young girl's bright smile beamed back at them, frozen in time. Marie's face softened, her eyes glistening with tears. "She was my best friend," she whispered. "Not a day goes by that I don't think about her." James's throat tightened. "Then why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Marie's face crumpled, and she sank into the worn armchair by the fireplace, her body folding in on itself. "Because I knew more than I let on." A cold chill swept through James. He moved to sit across from her, his hands gripping his knees. "What do you mean?" Marie's gaze dropped to her hands, her fingers twisting together. "The day Lily disappeared, she told me she was running away." Her voice was barely above a whisper, each word heavy with guilt. "She said she couldn't stay here anymore, that she was scared." James felt the floor tilt beneath him, his pulse thundering in his ears. "Scared? Scared of what?" Marie looked up, her eyes pleading. She wouldn't say, just that someone was watching her, following her. She was convinced she was in danger, but she wouldn't tell me who. Her shoulders sagged under the weight of the memory. "I thought she was being dramatic. I thought she just wanted attention. I never believed she was really in danger." James's vision blurred, anger rising in his chest. "You knew she was scared, and you didn't tell anyone? Not me? Not Carol? Not the police?" Marie flinched, tears spilling over her cheeks. "I thought she was making it up. She said crazy things, that she heard whispers at night, that someone was leaving her notes, but no one else ever saw them. I thought she was imagining things. And then she was just gone." Her voice broke, a choked sob escaping her lips. "I didn't think. I never thought." James leaned back, his head spinning. Someone was following Lily. Someone had been stalking her before she disappeared. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. "Why didn't you come forward after she vanished?" Marie shook her head miserably. "Because I was scared. I thought, what if I was wrong? What if she just ran away and didn't want to be found? I didn't want to get her in trouble if she didn't want to come back. And by the time I realized she wasn't coming back, it was too late. The police had already stopped searching. Everyone had moved on." She looked up, guilt etched into every line of her face. "I was a coward. I've lived with that every day since." James stood up, his legs unsteady as he paced the room. His thoughts were a tangled mess of anger, fear, and confusion. Someone had been watching Lily, and now they were threatening Marie. Was it the same person? Had Lily been taken? Or had she been on the run all this time? He turned back to Marie, his eyes sharp. "The letter you got, what exactly did it say?" Marie wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her jacket. It was short. It said, "Stay quiet if you want Lily to live." Her voice trembled. And then it was signed, "The Watcher." A shiver ran down James's spine. "The Watcher?" Marie nodded, her face pale. Lily used to call the person who was following her the Watcher. She said she could feel them, always watching her, even when no one was there. James sank back into his chair, his mind racing. A stalker, a shadow lurking in the background of his daughter's life. And now, after 13 years, they were still out there watching. Why now? Why send letters after all this time? He looked at Marie, his jaw clenched. "We're going to the police tonight." Marie's eyes widened with panic. "No, they said they'd kill her if I talked. What if they're watching us right now?" Her gaze darted to the window, her shoulders curling inward. "What if they know I came here?" James's blood ran cold. He moved to the window, his fingers pulling the curtain aside just enough to peer out into the darkness. Rain drummed softly against the glass, the streetlights casting faint pools of light on the slick pavement. There was no movement, no sign of anyone lurking in the shadows, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He turned back to Marie, his voice low and steady. "We can't do this alone. If someone took Lily, if they've been holding her all this time, we need help. We need to go to Detective Harris." Marie's face crumpled, fear flashing in her eyes. "But what if they hurt her? What if we lose her all over again?" James moved to her side, his hand resting on her shoulder. "We've already lost her once. We can't lose her again. Not when she's still out there somewhere." He squeezed her shoulder, his voice softening. "I need you to be brave, Marie, for Lily, for the girl who used to call you her sister." Marie's shoulders shook with silent sobs, her body leaning into his touch. "Okay," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Okay. We'll go to the police." James nodded, his chest tightening. "We'll do it together. We'll bring her home." A soft creak echoed from the hallway, the sound of a floorboard shifting beneath weight. James spun around, his eyes narrowing. He stepped into the hall, his heart pounding as he peered into the shadows. Nothing. The house was silent. He turned back to Marie, his face pale. "Did you hear that?" Marie's eyes widened, her face draining of color. "They're here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're watching us." Before James could respond, the front window shattered, glass exploding inward. A cold wind rushed into the room, carrying with it a whisper that sent a chill down his spine. "Keep quiet, or she dies." Shards of glass scattered across the floor, glittering like ice in the dim light. The cold night air flooded the room, carrying the chilling echo of the whispered threat. "Keep quiet, or she dies." The words seemed to linger, swirling through the air before dissipating into the silence that followed. James' heart thudded painfully in his chest as he shielded Marie, pulling her behind him. His eyes darted to the broken window, searching the darkness for any sign of movement. The street outside was empty, the rain-slicked pavement reflecting the orange glow of the street lamps. There was no one there, but the feeling of being watched, of eyes hidden in the shadows, was suffocating. Marie clung to his arm, her body trembling. They know we were going to the police," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her eyes were wide with terror, her face as pale as the moonlight that spilled through the broken glass. James tightened his grip on her shoulder, his jaw clenched. "We need to get out of here. Now. He grabbed his phone from the coffee table, his fingers shaking as he dialed 911. The dispatcher's calm voice answered, 911, what's your emergency? There's been an attack. My house, someone threw something through the window. We're being threatened, James said, his voice low but urgent. We need the police. Now. The dispatcher asked for his address and details of the incident before assuring him that officers were on their way. James ended the call, his eyes never leaving the darkness outside. Marie hugged herself, stepping away from the broken window. They were watching us. They heard everything. Her voice broke, fear lacing every word. We should have kept quiet. We should have listened. James turned to face her, his expression fierce. No, we can't live in fear, and we can't let them control us. Whoever they are, they've been doing this for too long. They've had power over us for 13 years. It stops tonight. Marie looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. But they have Lily. They could hurt her. Or worse. James' chest tightened, the thought of his daughter suffering making his blood run cold. But he couldn't give in to fear. He wouldn't let it paralyze him. We don't know that, but if we stay silent, we may never find her. We have to fight back. The distant sound of sirens pierced the night, growing louder as they approached. Red and blue lights flashed outside, illuminating the shattered window. James exhaled, relief flooding him. The police are here. He led Marie to the front door, unlocking it just as two officers approached the porch. Their faces were grim as they took in the broken glass and the shaken expressions of James and Marie. The taller officer stepped forward, his voice calm and authoritative. I'm Officer Mason. This is Officer Lee. We received a call about a break-in and threats. Are you both all right? James nodded, his shoulders sagging with relief. We're okay, but someone's watching us. They're threatening my daughter. She disappeared 13 years ago, and now they're sending letters. They broke the window to scare us. Officer Mason's eyes darkened. We'll need to see the letters. James hesitated. Mine's inside. But Marie burned hers. She was afraid. Marie looked down, shame coloring her cheeks. I was scared. They threatened to kill her if I told anyone. Officer Lee stepped closer, his tone gentle. We understand, but if someone's threatening you, we need all the evidence we can get to keep you safe. He turned to James. Can you show us the letter? James nodded, leading the officers inside. They stepped around the shattered glass, their boots crunching over the debris. He picked up the envelope from the coffee table, his fingers brushing over Lily's familiar handwriting. He handed it to Officer Mason, his throat tightening. It's from my daughter. She disappeared 13 years ago. This is the first I've heard from her since then. Officer Mason examined the letter, his jaw tightening. There's no return address, but the postmark is from Silver Pines. He looked up at James. Do you know anyone in Silver Pines? James shook his head. No, I've never even been there. But if Lily is there... His voice broke, his hands trembling. I need to find her. Officer Mason's eyes softened. We'll help you. But first, we need to make sure you're safe. Whoever broke this window could still be out there. He turned to his partner. Lee, secure the perimeter. Make sure no one's watching the house. Officer Lee nodded, his hand resting on his holstered weapon as he moved outside, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. James watched him go, his pulse quickening. If they were out there, they're probably long gone by now. Officer Mason's gaze was steady. Maybe, but if they're bold enough to threaten you at your own home, they might be bold enough to stick around. We'll make sure you're safe tonight. He looked back at the letter, his eyes narrowing. You said your daughter disappeared 13 years ago. Was there any sign of foul play back then? James swallowed hard, the memories resurfacing with brutal clarity. No, at least that's what the police said. They thought she ran away. She took her backpack and some clothes. There was no sign of a struggle, but she never contacted us, not once, until now. Officer Mason nodded, his expression thoughtful. We'll reopen the case. If she was being watched back then, if someone was stalking her, then it's possible she didn't leave by choice. He looked at James, his eyes sharp. Do you have any idea who might have been following her? James shook his head, frustration tightening his chest. No, she never said anything. But Marie, he turned to her, his expression pleading. You said she told you she was scared. Did she ever say who was watching her? Marie's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. No, she never named anyone. She just said she felt someone watching her, leaving her notes. But she wouldn't show me the notes. She kept saying no one would believe her. She choked back a sob, her voice breaking. I should have listened to her. I should have helped her. James moved to her side, his hand resting on her shoulder. It's not your fault. None of us knew. None of us understood. Officer Mason's radio crackled, and Officer Lee's voice came through. Mason, we've got something outside. The flower bed beneath the broken window, there's footprints. James' heart skipped a beat. Footprints. Someone had been standing there, watching them. Officer Mason's eyes hardened. I'm coming out. He looked at James and Marie, his expression firm. Stay inside. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone except the police. James nodded, his body tense. Do you think they're still out there? Officer Mason's mouth tightened into a grim line. If they are, we'll find them, and we'll make sure you're safe. He moved toward the door, his hand on his gun. Stay away from the windows and don't let anyone in. He disappeared outside, his flashlight beam flickering across the yard. James turned to Marie, his heart pounding. We're not safe here. They know where we live. They know everything. Marie's face was pale, her body trembling. If they're watching us, if they know what we're doing. Her eyes widened with terror. They could be watching Lily too. The room seemed to close in around them, the shadows deepening as the realization sank in. Whoever was watching them, whoever had Lily, they were always one step ahead. And they were willing to kill to keep their secret. The minutes stretched into hours as James and Marie waited in tense silence. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a damp chill that seeped through the broken window, causing the curtains to flutter like ghostly hands. Outside, Officer Mason and his team combed through the yard, their flashlights sweeping across the wet grass, illuminating footprints that led from the window to the edge of the woods behind the house. James stood in the hallway, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his eyes fixed on the front door. His body was rigid, his muscles coiled with tension. The feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes lurking just beyond the shadows, made his skin crawl. Whoever had sent that letter, whoever had thrown that rock, they were playing a twisted game. A soft voice broke through his thoughts. James? He turned to see Marie standing behind him, her arms wrapped around herself, her face pale and drawn. She looked fragile, haunted, like a child who had just learned that monsters were real. James softened, his shoulders relaxing just slightly. Are you okay? Marie shook her head, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I'm sorry for not telling you about Lily, for keeping it a secret all these years. I was scared and selfish. I thought if I just pretended everything was normal, that maybe it would be. Her voice cracked, and she looked away, shame coloring her cheeks. But nothing's been normal since she disappeared. Not for you, not for me. James's chest tightened. He took a step closer, his voice low and steady. I don't blame you, Marie. I blame myself. I was her father. I should have known. I should have protected her. He ran a hand over his face, the rough stubble scraping against his palm. But I was too wrapped up in my own life, my own problems. I failed her. Marie's head snapped up, her eyes blazing with sudden anger. You didn't fail her. The person who did this, they're the one who failed her. They're the one who took her away. Not you. Her voice trembled and her fists clenched at her sides. I hate them. Whoever they are, I hate them for what they did. To her. To all of us. James felt his resolve harden, his jaw clenching. We'll find them, and when we do, they're going to pay for what they did to Lily. The front door creaked open, and Officer Mason stepped inside, his face grim. We found footprints leading into the woods, but the rain washed away any clear tracks. Whoever it was, they're long gone by now. He glanced at the shattered window, his eyes narrowing, but they were standing there, watching you. James' stomach churned. Do you think they'll come back? Officer Mason's mouth tightened into a thin line. They will. People like this. They get a thrill from watching, from the fear they create. They won't stop until they get what they want. Marie's face drained of color. What do they want? Officer Mason looked at her, his expression grave. Control. Power. They want to keep you quiet, to keep their secret buried. He turned to James, his eyes cold and calculating. But we're not going to let that happen. We're reopening Lily's case. We'll investigate Silver Pines, find out who's been watching you, and we'll bring her home. Hope sparked in James's chest, burning away some of the fear that had taken root there. Thank you, officer. I've waited 13 years for this. I just want to bring her home. Officer Mason's gaze softened. We'll do everything we can, but for now you're not safe here. I'll have patrols watch your house, but I want you both somewhere secure tonight. Somewhere this watcher can't find you. James hesitated, his eyes drifting to the framed photos on the wall, snapshots of Lily as a child, her wide smile beaming back at him. I can't just leave. This is my home. It's all I have left of her. Marie stepped forward, her voice gentle. You don't have to leave for good. Just for tonight. We need to regroup, to figure out our next move. She bit her lip, her shoulders hunching. You can stay with me, if you want. I don't think I can be alone tonight. James hesitated, his eyes locking with hers. In her gaze, he saw his own fear reflected back at him, his own need for answers. All right, we'll go together. Officer Mason nodded. Good. Pack a bag. I'll have Lee follow you there, just to be safe. As James moved upstairs to pack, his mind raced with questions. Who was this watcher? Why had they targeted Lily? And what were they willing to do to keep their secret? His hands shook as he stuffed clothes into a bag, his gaze drifting to Lily's bedroom door. It was still the same as the day she left. Posters of boy bands taped to the walls, stuffed animals piled on the bed. He stepped inside, his chest tightening as he inhaled the faint scent of her perfume, still lingering in the air after all these years. He moved to her desk, his fingers trailing over the scattered notebooks and pens. A journal lay open, the pages yellowed with age. He picked it up, his eyes scanning her neat handwriting. I saw him again today, watching me from the tree line. He thinks I don't see him. But I do. He's always there. Waiting. James' blood ran cold, his heart pounding. She knew she was being watched. She'd written it down, but he'd never seen it before. Why hadn't she told him? Why hadn't she come to him for help? His fingers tightened around the journal as his eyes fell on a sketch, a crude drawing of a man standing beneath a tree, his face hidden by shadows. A chill ran down his spine. The figure was tall, lean, and familiar. A memory surfaced, sharp and sudden. A man standing at the edge of the yard, his face hidden by the brim of a baseball cap. James had seen him before, years ago. A stranger who watched from the shadows, a man he'd thought was harmless. His stomach lurched, his vision swimming. The watcher had been there all along, right under his nose. He stumbled back, his knees hitting the edge of the bed as the realization sank in. Lily hadn't run away. She'd been taken by someone who had been watching her and him. A loud knock echoed from downstairs, followed by Officer Mason's voice. James, you ready? James tore his eyes from the journal, his hands trembling. He had been blind, ignorant to the danger lurking right outside his door. But not anymore. He wouldn't be blind any longer. He wouldn't let fear keep him silent. He shoved the journal into his bag, his resolve hardening. Coming. As he moved down the stairs, his eyes flicked to the shattered window, to the darkness beyond. He knew they were still out there, watching, waiting. But this time, he was ready. This time, he would fight back. And he would bring his daughter home. The road to Silver Pines was long and winding, cutting through dense woods that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The sun hung low in the sky, its golden light filtered through the skeletal branches, casting shadows that danced across the asphalt. The air was heavy, the silence broken only by the hum of the car engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. James gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his jaw clenched with tension. Marie sat beside him, her body rigid, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. In the back seat, Detective Harris leaned forward, his notepad balanced on his knee, his sharp eyes flicking between James and the scenery outside. "Silver Pines is a small town," Harris said, his voice steady and matter-of-fact. "Population of about 1,000. Quiet, isolated, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business." He paused, his fingers tapping the notepad. "If Lily's there, someone's bound to have seen her." James's chest tightened, hope and fear twisting together. If she's there, then whoever took her is there too. Harris's jaw tightened. "That's what I'm counting on." Marie's voice was soft, trembling. "Do you think she's okay?" Her hands twisted together in her lap, her shoulders curling inward. "After all this time, do you think she's safe?" James's heart ached at the question, his mind swirling with images of Lily, his little girl, her bright smile, her infectious laugh. He tried to picture her now, older, a young woman he barely knew. Was she scared? Alone? Was she waiting for him to find her? Or had she given up hope? He swallowed hard, his voice thick. "I have to believe she's okay. I have to. Because the alternative, I can't think about that." Marie looked away, her eyes shimmering with tears. "I used to dream about her coming back. But the more time passed, the harder it became to remember her face." She wiped her eyes, her voice cracking. "I hate myself for that, for forgetting." James' grip on the steering wheel tightened. "You didn't forget. You just tried to survive. We all did." He glanced at her, his gaze softening. "But now, we're bringing her home. Together." Marie's lips trembled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you for letting me be here, for not blaming me." James looked back at the road, his jaw set. "You're the only one who believed her. You're the only one who knew she was scared. If I'd listened, if I'd seen the signs." His voice faltered, anger and guilt clawing at his chest. "I should have protected her." Harris spoke up, his tone firm. "The only person to blame is the one who took her. We're going to find them. And when we do, they'll pay for what they've done." The car fell silent as they drove deeper into the woods, the trees growing taller and denser, their branches twisting together to form a canopy overhead. Shadows danced across the windshield, flickering like ghostly figures in the fading light. Silver Pines emerged from the forest, a small town nestled between the hills, its streets narrow and winding. The houses were old, their paint peeling, their windows dark and empty. The town looked frozen in time, untouched by modern life. James pulled up outside a diner, its neon sign flickering weakly in the twilight. He turned off the engine, his eyes scanning the quiet street. "This place, it feels abandoned." Harris opened his door, stepping out and stretching his legs. "It's dying, like a lot of small towns. But there are still people here, people who might know something." He glanced at the diner, his eyes narrowing. This is as good a place as any to start asking questions. Marie shivered, her arms wrapping around herself. "It feels wrong, like we're being watched." James looked around, his gaze lingering on the dark windows of the buildings, the empty alleyways. He felt it too, a prickle on the back of his neck, a sense of eyes following his every move. But there was no one there, just shadows and silence. "Let's go," he said, his voice firm. "We're not leaving without answers." The bell above the diner door jingled as they stepped inside, the smell of stale coffee and fried food thick in the air. A lone waitress stood behind the counter, her hair piled on top of her head, a cigarette dangling from her lips. Her eyes flicked up as they entered, her expression guarded. "Evening," Harris greeted, his tone casual. "We're looking for someone. A girl, about 27 years old. Her name's Lily Reynolds." He pulled a photo from his pocket, holding it up. "You seen her?" The waitress's eyes widened, her body stiffening. But she quickly looked away, her fingers tightening around her cleaning rag. "Never seen her," she mumbled, turning to wipe down the counter. Harris's eyes narrowed. "That's funny, because she sent a letter from here, from Silver Pines. You sure you've never seen her?" The waitress hesitated, her shoulders tense. "Lots of people come through here, can't remember them all." James stepped forward, his voice tight with urgency. "Please, she's my daughter. She's been missing for 13 years. If you've seen her, if you know anything, please tell us." The waitress glanced at him, her face softening, but then her eyes darted to the window, her body going rigid. "You shouldn't have come here." Marie's eyes widened. "Why not?" The waitress dropped her rag, her hands shaking. "This place, it ain't safe. Not for strangers. People who ask questions, they disappear." Harris's jaw clenched. "Are you saying someone took Lily?" The waitress's face drained of color. "I didn't say that. I didn't say nothing." Her eyes flicked to the window again, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He'll find you, just like he found her." James' blood ran cold. "Who? Who's doing this?" The waitress looked at him, fear etched into every line of her face. "The Watcher. He sees everything. He owns this town and everyone in it." Her eyes were wide, wild. "You need to leave, before he sees you." The bell above the door jingled, and a man stepped inside. Tall and lean, his face shadowed beneath the brim of a baseball cap. His eyes were cold, dark, unblinking. He stared at James, his lips curling into a slow, chilling smile. The waitress backed away, her face pale. "Oh God. He knows." The man's eyes never left James. He took a step forward, his voice low, dangerous. "You're not welcome here." James's heart pounded, his body tense with fear and fury. "Where's my daughter?" The man's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Dead, if you don't leave." Before James could move, the man turned and walked out of the diner, his footsteps echoing on the pavement. The door swung shut behind him, the bells jingle eerily cheerful. Harris's face was pale, his hand resting on his gun. "We need to go, now." The lights flickered, the shadows on the walls stretching, twisting. The air grew cold, suffocating. Marie's voice shook. "He's watching us, isn't he?" James looked at the window, his reflection staring back at him. But behind it, in the darkness, he saw a face hidden beneath a baseball cap. Watching, waiting, his blood ran cold. The Watcher was real. The car's headlights cut through the darkness as James sped down the winding road, the engine roaring as he pushed the pedal to the floor. Trees loomed on either side, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, shadows twisting in the night. In the back seat, Marie's breath came in shallow gasps, her face pale, her body trembling. Beside her, Detective Harris gripped his gun, his eyes scanning the darkness, every muscle in his body tense. "He knows we're here," Marie whispered, her voice shaking. "He was waiting for us, watching us." James's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. "I don't care who he is. He's not keeping Lily from me, not anymore." Harris leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "That man in the diner, you recognize him?" James's mind flashed to the face beneath the baseball cap, the cold, calculating eyes, the cruel smile. "No, but I've seen him before. He was outside my house, years ago, watching Lily." His stomach churned with anger and fear. He's been stalking her for years, waiting for the right moment to take her. Harris's eyes darkened. "Then he's more dangerous than we thought. He's planned this, orchestrated it, and he's not gonna let her go easily." He glanced back at Marie, his voice softening. "You okay?" Marie's lips trembled, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I knew she was scared. I knew someone was following her, and I did nothing." She hugged herself, her shoulders shaking. "I let him take her." James' chest tightened, his voice rough. "No, he took her. He's the one who did this, not you." He looked at her through the rearview mirror, his eyes fierce. "We're going to get her back. I promise." Harris's phone buzzed, breaking the tension. He answered quickly, his face grim as he listened. "Got it, thanks." He hung up, his jaw set. "That was Mason. He tracked the plates on the car that was outside your house, James. It belongs to a man named Richard Hale, lives just outside of town. Ex-cop. He was fired 10 years ago for misconduct, stalking a teenage girl." James's blood ran cold. "It's him. It has to be. He's the Watcher." Harris nodded, his face pale. "He's been stalking girls for years. When he lost his badge, he came here, to Silver Pines, where no one would question him, where he could watch in secret." His eyes were hard. "We're ending this tonight." They pulled up outside a decrepit farmhouse, its windows dark, the roof sagging with age. The air was cold, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. Shadows clung to the walls, twisting and shifting as the wind howled through the trees. Harris checked his gun, his voice low. Stay behind me. We go in fast. Stay low and don't make a sound. We don't know what he's capable of." James nodded, his heart pounding. "I'm not leaving without Lily." Harris's eyes were cold, determined. "Neither am I." They crept toward the house, their footsteps silent on the overgrown grass. The front door hung crooked on its hinges, creaking softly as the wind pushed it open. Inside, the darkness was suffocating, the air thick with dust and mildew. James' stomach churned as he stepped inside, the floorboards groaning beneath his weight. The walls were lined with newspaper clippings, photographs, hundreds of them, overlapping, covering every inch of space. Faces stared back at him, girls with wide eyes and bright smiles, frozen in time. Marie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. These are all missing girls." Her eyes filled with tears, horror twisting her features. "Oh God, he's been watching them all." James' heart pounded as his eyes scanned the wall, searching desperately. And then he saw her. Lily's face, smiling back at him from a school photo, her curls bouncing around her shoulders, her blue eyes sparkling with life. A sob escaped his lips, his body trembling. "Lily?" Harris's jaw tightened. He's been collecting them, trophies of his victims. He moved closer, his flashlight revealing scribbled notes beneath the photos, dates, times, locations. He's been tracking them, stalking them for years. Marie's voice shook. "This man, he's a monster." A low voice echoed from the darkness, cold and mocking. "Monster? No, I'm an artist." They spun around, guns raised, as Richard Hale stepped out of the shadows, his face twisted into a sick smile. His eyes gleamed with malice, his body relaxed, confident. "I capture beauty before the world ruins it." His gaze flicked to Lily's photo, his lips curling. "Your daughter, she was exquisite, so full of life, so innocent. I couldn't let the world corrupt her." James's vision went red, his hands shaking with rage. "Where is she?" His voice was raw, his body vibrating with fury. "Where is my daughter?" Hale's smile widened. "Close, so close, but you'll never find her, not before it's too late." Harris took a step forward, his gun trained on Hale's chest. "Where is she?" His voice was deadly calm, his eyes cold. "Tell us now, or I'll put a bullet in your head." Hale laughed, the sound hollow and chilling. "You think you can save her? You think you're heroes?" His eyes gleamed with madness. "You're too late. She belongs to me now. She's mine." James lunged forward, his fist connecting with Hale's jaw. The man stumbled back, his head snapping to the side, but his laughter never stopped. "You're just like her, so full of hope, so desperate." He grinned, his teeth stained yellow. "It makes the breaking so much sweeter." Harris shoved Hale against the wall, his gun digging into his ribs. "Where is she?" His voice was ice, his eyes blazing. "Where did you take her?" Hale's eyes flicked to the door at the end of the hallway, his smile widening. "You're too late. She's already gone." James ran, his heart racing as he threw open the door. A staircase spiraled down into darkness, the air damp and cold. He descended the steps 2 at a time, his flashlight cutting through the shadows. The basement was a maze of concrete walls, wires hanging from the ceiling, water dripping from rusted pipes. The air was thick, heavy, carrying a faint scent of decay. James's stomach twisted as he moved deeper, his voice echoing off the walls. "Lily, Lily, it's me, I'm here." A faint sound reached him. A muffled sob, weak and broken. His heart leaped, his body trembling. "Lily?" He rounded the corner, his flashlight illuminating a small figure huddled in the corner, her wrists bound, her face pale and gaunt. Her hair hung in tangled curls, her body thin and frail, her eyes wide with terror. "Lily." James dropped to his knees, his hands shaking as he pulled her into his arms, his voice breaking. "Oh God, Lily, I found you, I found you." She looked up at him, her eyes hollow, haunted. "Dad, I knew you'd come." Her voice was weak, her body limp against his chest. I waited so long." James held her close, tears streaming down his face. "I'm here. I'm not leaving you, not ever again." He rocked her gently, his heart breaking. "You're safe now? You're safe." Hale's laughter echoed from the top of the stairs, cold and mocking. "She'll never be safe. Not from me, not from the Watcher." James looked up, his eyes blazing with fury. "You'll never touch her again." His voice was low, deadly. "I'll make sure of it.